Hello. Today I'm going to be talking about an episode in the life of a landscape painter by Cesar Aira, Argentine writer. This novel came as a recommendation from my years of watching the far superior BookTube channel, Better Than Food. This was one of his favorite books of its respective year. I think 2018 was when he got around to reviewing this. Published in 2000, this is one of the few works of Aira's that has been translated to English. And I have actually recommended this to my coworker who hails from Argentina, and she will be reading it in the original Spanish. Future Dan here. My coworker finished the novel rather quickly and had a lot of praise for it. She really enjoyed it, and it was the first book that she had read in Spanish in a long time. Of note, she found the writing style and in particular certain word choices very distinct, so she wanted to give credit to whoever it is that handled the translation of this book. From her perspective, translating this work to English would have been quite the undertaking. This was a short read, only about 88 pages, so I would strongly suggest you carve out maybe 2 or 3 hours of your day so that you read all of this in one sitting, should you choose to embark upon it. I think you will be entirely rewarded. This is easily one of the best books I've read this year. It functions really wonderfully as this commentary on art and how we shape art and how certain other facets of life that might not seem like it can also take on this artful quality, the dedication of an artist to their craft. And it's also just this really gripping adventure story. I was reading this while donating plasma, as I tend to, and once I approached the pivotal moment in this book, which I will talk about shortly, I started pumping my wrist a lot faster than I should have been, because I was just so unconsciously engrossed in this exhilarating circumstance that befalls our main character here, and I almost passed out on the donor floor. I remember reading Way of Kings and being really excited reading that, but I didn't nearly faint. So hopefully that's enough of a recommendation on its own. I'm going to talk a little bit about what this book is first, and then I'm going to talk about its contents, which I think you should really explore for yourself. This is like a quasi-historical take on a period in the life of German landscape painter Johann Moritz Rugendas and his adventures across Latin America, particularly in Argentina, along with his steadfast companion Kraus, more of a boisterous personality, Rugendas being kind of quiet and reserved. They're very evenly keeled as a duo and genuinely care for each other. Kraus's dedication to his friend makes the most emotionally resonant component of the book, in my opinion. I don't think it nearly would have worked without him serving as foil to Rugendas. Just gonna button up my sleeves here so I could looking like a bum here. I did just get dressed and showered. Not in that order. Inspired by his teacher, Alexander von Humboldt, who was also a fantastic painter, Rugendas is touring across South America, hitting up Chile, Brazil, other countries in the area, and just documenting the landscape. I think Aira drops like a figure of around over 3,000 works generated over his many-year stay in these countries. And so you have this framework for adventure, you know, these German artists were exploring this largely unfamiliar territory, or at least a territory that was not experienced by a majority of Europeans at the time. And then you also have this perfectly organic setup that can explore the role of art in their adventure. It kind of causes you to reflect a little bit on what it must have been like to experience reality through art at the time. They experienced such a variety of natural beauty. And not only is what they are encountering quite stunning, but it is put in just perfect, succinct terms. Aira definitely has a penchant for beautiful descriptions, but he does not linger in them obsessively, because he is still telling a story. It really is this perfect adornment to the narrative, which is also part of its subject. If ever there was a need to have a strength in that realm as a writer, it would be in this novel about a landscape painter. I almost wanted more from this book. It was so good. As they are journeying throughout Argentina, which Humboldt advises his protege that he not do, because there's such a greater variety of wildlife to document elsewhere, and Argentina, while very diverse in its own right, has a lot of desert, and might not result in the same vibrant pieces you would get from Rugendas surveying other places throughout Latin America. But in order to get to their next destination, Rugendas and Krauss have to take this several day-long journey through this arid desert. Over that time, they're reflecting on the nature of art and its role in their lives, its role as it relates to history and how we perceive history and how it tints history, and Rugendas is reflecting on whether his craft can actually sustain him. Even though he is one of the most prominent landscape painters in Europe, maybe at the time the most, he's worried whether or not the works he will produce will be enough to support him. A fair concern for any artist, one that I feel is all the more relevant today. So you've got these two guys on this journey talking about art. They encounter something that changes Rugendas' life forever, and drastically, and violently so. I cannot talk about the book without exploring what happens here. I just simply recommend you read this. It's fantastic. I'm going to start divulging its contents now. So in the opening maybe dozen or so pages, Aira really dumps a lot of historical information on you to contextualize Rugendas' trip to Latin America. In particular, he emphasizes how Rugendas hails from a lineage of action painters, people who would document and depict in their art battle sequences and war. During a period of peace, the family kind of fell out of that trade and had to pivot to other styles of painting, which is why Rugendas is a landscape painter. And I think partly why it seems Aira is saying he has this sort of like disaffection for his art. The luster his art holds for him has kind of faded, I feel. And so you get the impression that this is going to be a very historically accurate account. But having just simply perused the Wikipedia page for Rugendas, there does not appear to be an account of him getting struck by lightning, and then struck by lightning again 15 seconds later, and then getting dragged by his horse across the desert, permanently disfiguring him and causing him to develop a dependency on morphine to deal with the violent spasms he experiences in his face as a result of the nerve damage he incurred from getting dragged across the desert. So I think Aira took some liberties here, and I'm super happy that he did. Once you hit this moment where he has to go off in the mountains on his horse to try to find a path they can traverse to get where they need to go, and then he's just immediately overwhelmed with this storm. It's exhilarating, and it is an inciting incident brought about by the very nature the protagonist is depicting. The themes of this novel really interweave beautifully. So Rugendas gets fucked up, man. He gets brutalized. And something that's really cute, I think, is that he doesn't seem to hold it against his horse, whom actually he was like magnetized to when the lightning struck the both of them. And he couldn't separate perfectly, which is why he really couldn't get his foot out of the stirrups and why it dragged him around. He doesn't hold it against the horse, or at least it's not explicitly stated that he has any animosity for it. Rather, he coins this wonderful nickname, Flash, and they spend the rest of their adventure together. The morphine that he has to take to deal with his disfigurement also works its way into his craft. How could it not? He's in this constant like fugue state, this feverish, hallucinatory outlook that absolutely affects how he captures these landscapes. Something that I haven't touched on yet that is crucial to the theming in this novel is the notion of like a physiognomatic procedure, capturing like the essence, the face, if you will, of a mountain or a landscape. It really is this organic living whole that needs to be considered in its totality first before you can approach it. But you're also considering how its multifaceted elements, how its flora and fauna, how erosion, how all of these factors have contributed to the makeup of this natural environment. And so you must reflect these things in your procedure, which becomes this like almost science to Rugendas at the start of the novel. He's basically perfect at it. Krauss he even notes is not quite as good at it. But Rugendas is lacking this sort of fervor for his craft, which now he has. It's tough to say whether it's the drugs or whether it is having a near-death experience so radically shift his perceptions, but all of a sudden his craft takes on this ravenous hunger. As delirious as he still is, all that he wants to do is paint. As soon as he can get rolling with the morphine, he's out on the field trying to capture anything he can. Not only is his technique, while still rooted in the physiognomatic procedure, becoming more passionate, it's lending itself better to his paintings because they encounter some situations that require this sort of in-the-moment energy. At the start of the journey, Rugendas is lamenting the fact that he's been missing out on all of these violent and exciting episodes, particularly the conflicts between the white men in the area and the native peoples, who are maybe not necessarily depicted in the most flattering light. I wonder if that is Aira trying to capture the tone of how that perspective would have framed those peoples at the time, though it is certainly not as grotesque as a lot of other novels I've read. He's also lamenting that they didn't encounter too many storms, but he gets his wish, and in a weird sort of paradoxical way, even though it is the worst thing that could have possibly happened to him, that he encounters these violent forces of nature and man, it invigorates him. It actually snaps him back to attention in a weird way. Even though he's not lucid, he's deeply engrossed in life and the pursuit of his craft now. And so when they encounter a huge raid in the final stretch of the book, something between like 500 and 1,000 natives battling with these farmers, he gets the opportunity to capture a battle. It's the pursuit that his ancestors were called to. It seems almost as if there's this notion that it's sort of baked into him, that this is truly what he wants to be doing. This is truly the muse that ignites his passion the greatest. And so tripping out on morphine and wearing this veil over his face, not to conceal his monstrous, truly monstrous appearance from the other people around him, but to kind of protect him from the sunlight because he gets these intense migraines. He's out there depicting these crazy battles. And some of like the posturing of the native people is like so outlandish and is truly literally like posturing, an intimidation tactic. He also sort of takes on this surreal, outlandish capturing method. He is himself now rendered this surreal being, this thing that is otherworldly, heightened and grotesque. And he's out there, like, basically the whole battle, trying to get as many works of art out of this rare occurrence as possible. All the while, Krauss is feeling this almost like guilt that not only has his friend been so badly hurt, he's not sure if he should be indulging in his friend's desire to capture these scenes, to continue painting. But he also knows Rugendas, like, deeply, and he can't help but allow Rugendas, as much as his life has been shattered, to do this. The subject which he is depicting now, which is conflict, has a physiognomy of its own. It has an essence. In order to appropriately capture this scene, he had to have incurred this natural wrath, and he had to have his appreciation for art reinvigorated, because that energy is necessary in his procedure now to capture the physiognomy of war. And Rugendas, it's not entirely sure what is motivating him. It still seems to be this sort of haze and stupor he is caught in due to the morphine. He wanders into one of the natives' camps. After the battle, they're feasting upon some of the cattle that they wrangled away from the farmers, and he just like walks into the middle of the campfire, and they're all just too stunned by his appearance to do anything. And this beautiful moment occurs that bookends the whole story, where he just sits and just starts painting them. The physiognomy of the other. It is mentioned throughout the battle sequences that Rugendas cannot get too close to the action, and understandably. It is in this tranquil moment after the battle, in the afterglow of violent conflict, that he is able to get that detail he was looking for. He's able to get up close and personal, which makes you reflect back on when he was capturing landscapes and how he could only get so close to capturing his subject. He had to use this procedure to encapsulate something so grand and complex on a smaller scale. But now he, in his feverish state is able to get that close. He has the abandon, I think, to capture his subject in intimate detail. And all the while, Kraus, his dutiful companion, is watching cautiously off in the shadows. Beautiful fucking story. Beautiful book. I'm still thinking about it. I want to reread it immediately, but because this is an interlibrary loan and I'm already overdue on it, I've got to give this to somebody else. It's so fucking good. It's so worth your time. Meaning is just packed into this story, which is also this exciting adventure. It never really lets up once Rugendas gets struck by lightning. I think you're just going to soar through this novel and take in its literary vistas with relish. It is wonderful. It might be the best book I've read so far this year. I mean, it's hard to fault a novel that does so much in such little time and does so well. I also have a deep interest to read the rest of Aira's work. I am hooked. So absolutely check this one out. I have nothing else to say but praise. This is like perfect.